Okay, so up to Perak Memvov, Pasuk Chaf Ches, new parsha here. Before we get to this new pasuk, I just want to comment that I saw in the name of the Netziv that there were in fact other descendants of Yaakov that were not counted in the 70 names, 70 nefesh. He says certainly Serach was not the only granddaughter. They didn't all have boys and no girls, but we're not counting all of them. Only some of them are counted. Okay. So now up to pasuk Chav Ches. Ve'es Yehuda sholach lefanov el Yosef lehoyrois lefanov goshna vayavayu ad gosh. And Yehuda he sent or had sent before him to Yosef to guide or to direct, point out before him to Goshen, Vayavayu Atza Goshen, and they arrived in the land of Goshen. Vayeser Yosef Merkavtoi Vaya'al Lekras Yisrael Ovid Goshen. Okay, so first question is, what is this pasuk doing? In other words, what is this point of this whole narrative in general of sending Yehuda ahead? Additionally, we have to ask what's the meaning of this expression, ve'es Yehuda, which sound instead of Vigishlach Yisrael es Yehuda, there seems to be a contrast. This person X was something, and Yehuda was that. So it's like a contrast with something else. And it doesn't even say who the subject is. But Yehuda sholach lefanov. So we're talking about obviously Yaakov or Yisrael, but the fact that the pasuk doesn't say the name Yisrael again indicates that we're supposed to read this, even though there's a break, we're reading this as a continuation. And why, then the question is, why is it a continuation? Okay, now another important question is, what's the point of sending someone to Goshen and then Yosef comes and meets them in Goshen? Meaning, like this, if they're going to meet Yosef, so why do they go to Goshen? And then when Yosef hears they're in Goshen, he's like, oh, let me go meet them. Shouldn't they go to Yosef, who will then set them up in Goshen? Because Yosef suggested to them, look, come to me, you live in Goshen. And then when they actually arrived, he had to get permission from Pharaoh for them to live in Goshen. So you would think then that they shouldn't go straight to Goshen. They should go to wherever Yosef is, who will then arrange for them to be settled in Goshen. Why do they go to Goshen? And then it's as if when Yosef heard that they already arrived, he said, oh, they're there, let me go meet them. So, which just stresses the point, or brings out the point, that they didn't go immediately to meet Yosef. So, first of all, they could have gone to where Yosef was. Even if they're not going to meet where Yosef is, why did they go to Goshen and then Yosef come there? Maybe Yosef should be ready for them, waiting when they get to Goshen. But no, they're going to Goshen, which is not where Yosef is, clearly, because Yosef has to hear about them and then say, oh, let me go meet them in Goshen. Okay, so what's that about? And then, of course, the question of what is the meaning of lehoyros? What's the significance of lehoyros? We find this expression when it comes to derech. Toirim is a derech. You guide them or lead them on the, direct them to derech. What's the role that Yehuda has to direct, to lead, or to guide to Goshen? Why is this? What's he doing? What's it for? And also notice that we have lefanov twice in this pasuk. Yehuda was sholach lefanov, lehoyros lefanov. So it's stressed that Yehuda is going before him, before Yisrael. Okay, notice as well, okay, so these are the questions, and then I want to remind you, or bring out something, that this Yehuda being Sholach Lefanov is contrasted with Yosef, about whom it says twice that Hashem sent him. In Perek Memhei Pasuk Zayin, Vaishlachini Elokim Lifneichem. So he says that Hashem sent him Lifneichem. Hashem sent him in front of them. And I thought that was twice over there. Lo atem shlachtem osihenu ki ha'elikim. Right. So Yosef says, I am sent by Elikim. And he says, Vayishlachini Elikim lifneichem. And there's a pasuk in Tehillim, Kuf Hey, that says, Sholach lifneihem ish le'eved nimka Yosef. Tehillim Kuf Hey pasuk Yud Zayin. Sholach lifneihem ish. Hashem sent a person ahead of them. Yosef was sold as an Eved to be the person going ahead of them. And here, Ves Yehuda Sholach Lefanov seems to be a contrast to Yosef, or at least we have to read this in light of the same expression used regarding Yosef, who was sent by God. He says he was sent by God, as does the Shayra Tehillim. And Yaakov here is sending someone else, Lefanov. Okay. So all of this will be explained in light of the pasuk in Yeshaya Perek Lamed, Perek that we've been looking back to numerous times to shed light on this parsha. And I'll tell you the idea, and then we'll look at the pasuk. The idea is that Yosef would lead Bnei Yisrael down to Mitzrayim. They potentially could have followed Yosef. They could have viewed Yosef as being sent before them. Meaning to say, what does it mean to be sent before them? It means that if he's there, that indicates that they're supposed to be there as well. He serves as a beacon guide for whom they should follow. But that would be, if they were to follow Yosef down to Mitzrayim, that would be accepting the Yosef approach to their descent to Mitzrayim. And the Yosef approach to their descent to Mitzrayim was an approach of going down to Mitzrayim without the clarity and the guidance of the word of Hashem. His whole story is all about that. He ended up there under circumstances of hiddenness. His whole approach is to recognize Hashem's hiddenness and to work within that. And because of that, he embraces Mitzrayim and the fact that they are distant from Hashem. And if we were to follow him into Mitzrayim, we're basically accepting that Yosef's embrace of divine hiddenness leads the way. And Yaakov does not want to follow Yosef literally and then also spiritually, or I'm not going to say metaphorically because it's more than that. Doesn't want to follow Yosef literally and therefore spiritually. He's, by sending Yehuda ahead of him to Goshen, he's saying, you should know, when I go down to Mitzrayim, I am actually not following Yosef. I'm following Yehuda. The S Yehuda Shalach Lefanov Goshen. He has all his children, and Yosef Hayib in Mitzrayim. But it's not Yosef being in Mitzrayim who is going to attract Yaakov to come down to Mitzrayim. Rather, it's Yehuda who he sent before him. And he's only going to Goshen to follow Yehuda, not to follow Yosef. What does it mean to follow Yehuda, not to follow Yosef? It means to follow the one who goes down to Mitzrayim based on the word of Hashem. So Yehuda's leadership, Yehuda's Hayrah, is a leadership that stands in the light of revelation, because the Devar Hashem already came to Yaakov saying it's time to go down. The leadership of Yosef and his possibility of being the king is stands for a leadership through action, without definition, without understanding, without meaning. Action before the Devar Hashem clarified what we need to know. And it is that kind of leadership that Yaakov is replacing or eschewing by sending Yehuda in front of him to Gush. Okay, that is the basic idea. And what we're going to, I'll show you where this comes out from the psukim in Shaya. And I will also get back to the list of questions we had on these psukim, some of which the answers can be obvious, but some of them maybe not so obvious. And we'll talk about what the significance of Goshen is in this context as well. So first, let's look at which pasuk in Yeshaya Perek Lamed specifically is the clue to unlocking the inner meaning of this pasuk. Bas Yehuda Shalach Lefan of Goshen Alahiris. That one is in Yeshaya Perek Lamed, pasuk Chaf, which says, Hashem will give you lechem tzor umayim lachatz. So you can have a small amount of bread and water. V'lo yikanef oid meirecha, v'hayu einecha ro'es es meirecha. Your guide will no longer be hidden. You will be able to see your guide. Okay. Where does this come into the... so I'm saying that Yehuda was sent Laharis Lefan of Goshna to be the visible guide, as opposed to Yosef, who was guiding them, leading them down to Mitzrayim, but he was hidden. He was literally disguised, right? Now, what's going on over here is like this. In Yeshaya Perek Lamed, the beginning of the parak talks about those who go down to Mitzrayim, ufi lo sha'alu. They don't ask Hashem what to do. Now, Yosef said, you see, it's pi hamedaber aleichem. And meanwhile, we really want the peh Hashem. And Yosef said, Koi Omar bincha Yosef, redo elai al ta'amid. Koi Omar is usually followed with Hashem. But Yosef sees himself as the messenger of Hashem. He said explicitly, Vayishlacheni Elokim lifnechem. And therefore, Koi Omar bincha Yosef and Pi hamedaber aleichem is like Koi Omar Hashem, and it's like the P of Pi lo sha'alu, meaning you don't want to come down to Mitzrayim until Hashem tells you to. Yosef, I'm telling you to. And V'hine einechem ro'os ve'ine achi binyamin kifi hamedaber aleichem, comes the Navi and says, okay, that's Hashem, maybe, but it's in disguise. And Yosef is dangling the promise of V'hine einechem ro'os. Comes the Navi and says, you can have a moira, a guide who's not hidden. You can actually see your guide. Okay? We won't have to go back. There's a lot to reference in that parak on the story of Yosef and on this general nakuda. I don't want to point it all out. I'm trying to point out a few things. In parak Lamed. So there's a message over there. There's the people that say we don't want the Nevi'im to prophesy to us, and then they say Suru mini derech hatu mini oirach. You don't know which path to take because you don't have the Nevi'im speaking to you. And the path that they would tell you is, the Navi says, Beshuva v'nachas and hashkit v'vidcha, and instead you want to run away on a horse. Okay, and then it says. All right, and this, we'll get back to this soon, but there's the Kavura Sasus, And Sheker Asus is Shua, which stands for symbolizes the might of Mitzrayim, which Yosef participated in or with, partnered with. And there's the promise of the Navi that says, don't go down to Mitzrayim, or don't do it until Hashem tells you to do it. And that's a promise of a different kind of derech, which is a derech of Shuva v'nachas. And there it says, going back to the pasuk, we started off with the parak Lamed pasuk Chav. Now I'm reading parak Lamed pasuk Yotes. Ki am b'tzion yeshev b'Yerushalayim. You can live in Tzion and Yerushalayim. Bachor l'sivke, you won't cry. Cholen yachnecha, and Hashem will give you lechem tzar mayim lach. So you can live in Tzion, and there you'll have a small amount of bread. You're going to hear the word saying, this is the derech to take. So the whole question of, should we go down to Mitzrayim, should we take that derech, which is the derech of running away on horses. And we're not supposed to do that until we hear from Hashem. And if we hear from Hashem, then we can stay in Tzion, and then we'll know exactly where to go. Now, what does this mean? What does this mean? Okay. It means that we're not supposed to want, we don't want our guides to be hidden. We want Hashem to guide us, not in a kind of Hester, dressing up as, or obviously not dressing up, but a messenger of Yosef, who considered himself a messenger of God, not because Hashem is speaking to him as Nechat Hashman Adava, but rather because he recognizes the destiny of what's happening to him as being a message from Hashem. So that's not clarity that comes from meaning, from knowledge. That's taking the events and using them to imply a not understood message from Hashem. That's called Hashem is hidden. And what this comes from is this desire to have might, like it says, run away on the horses, and a desire to have wealth, because Yosef said we have to take care of the rav. So that's why the pasuk says, Hashem lechem tzar u'mayim lachatz v'lo yikon avoid merecha. If you don't need a lot of bread, if you don't mind about the rav, then you're not going to partner with the mitzvah, who are hidden from Hashem, and insist on the might of the horse. Instead, you can live in Tzion. Okay, now, what does that mean? Tzion, I'll explain to you in a second. But let me just summarize what we said so far. Sending Yehuda lahiris lefanov is saying, I don't want Yosef to be my guide. I don't want Yosef to be the one that leads me down to the time. I don't want to follow in the footsteps, the metaphorical, the physical and metaphorical footsteps of Yosef. Which is to say, I'm not going to accept that our descent to Mitzrayim follows from the events that are not understood, the events that took place without the word of Hashem. I am going to go down to Mitzrayim in the footsteps of Yehuda, who is the one that stands for a revealed kind of descent to Mitzrayim and a revealed kind of activity, who's only going to Mitzrayim because Hashem told us time to go. Now let's get to Goshen. So the pasuk says, as I mentioned, the pasuk in Yeshaya says, "Ki am b'tzion yeshev Yerushalayim." You can live in Tzion, you can live in Yerushalayim, and you could, as long as you're satisfied with lechem tzar u'mayim lachatz, you don't need a lot of money. Then you'll know which way to go. Now, this is a reference, an allusion to Goshen, as we discussed. Because it says about Goshen that Goshen was an eretz that was between Canaan and Mitzrayim. It was not quite considered part of Mitzrayim, it was off of Mitzrayim. So by living in the land of Goshen, it's like they're living in Tzion, because they are not assimilating into Mitzrayim. They're staying apart from Mitzrayim. And you look in Sefer Yeshua, in Chelik Yehuda, there was a city called Goshen. That's, I forgot which parak that's in the cities, maybe parak Yud Aleph Pasuk Dazayin. But there's a city in, maybe it's later in Sefer Yeshua, the cities of Yehuda, there's a city called Goshen. there's an area in Eretz Yisrael called Eretz Goshen, like we have this place, not just a city, but it's called Eretz Goshen in Mitzrayim. And the Radak, and the Pirkei Eliezer, but the Radak, meaning the Radak even says that it's in Pshat. The Radak learns that the Eretz Goshen referred to in the conquest of Canaan is the same Eretz Goshen that they lived in when they went down to Gas Mitzrayim. It's the same place. Pirkei Eliezer says that it was a gift to Sarah from Parai, I think. Parai gave her Eretz Goshen. It's Eretz Yisrael, it belongs to us. So they're living in Mitzrayim, yes, but they're living in a place that's apart from Mitzrayim and maybe even is considered to be within Eretz Canaan or to be within the ownership of Yisrael, being Sarah's property. So therefore the pasuk says, Am B'tzion Yeshiv. Here Yosef is inviting you to come down to Mitzrayim, but you can insist that, no, I don't want to live in Mitzrayim, I want to live in Tzion. I'm going to Mitzrayim, I'm going to go to Goshen. So that's the difference between Yehuda and Yosef. Yosef lives in Mitzrayim. That stands for the possibility of becoming integrated with Mitzrayim. And why would you become integrated with Mitzrayim? Because you're following the hidden hashgacha of Hashem. What if you want to follow the revelation of Hashem? Then you don't live in the place of hiddenness, which is Mitzrayim. Rather, you live in a place of Hashem's revelation, which is Tzion or Goshen. So, as Yehuda shalach lefonav Goshna, shalach lefonav El Yosef. It's that, okay, we're not just going to Yosef. We're going to go to Yosef, or we're going to be led to Yosef by Yehuda, and he's going to take us to Goshen. He's not going to take us to wherever the capital where Yosef lived. Okay, and that's the pasuk saying is that, as we mentioned, that in Yeshaya, that it says, "Oh, you want to run away on a horse." That's Yosef's midah, which is Shoker Ish and Guras Hasus, the might of Mitzrayim. But there's a different promise of Shuva v'Nachas, a different way to go, which is the way of Hashem, Shuva v'Nachas, Zeh Derech L'chu Voi, and that's the one that Yaakov is choosing to go. So this is the rejection of Yosef in favor of Yehuda. And what that means is like this, that Yosef creates, of course, the material conditions, but the meaningfulness, the certainty, the clarity that this is where we should go has to follow from the one who's the bearer of the meaning, the one who stands for the meaning, as opposed to the one, Yosef, who infers what to do directly for the material conditions instead of following the meaning. And that's what Yaakov is saying. Meaning comes before action. Okay. So that's the fun of. So let me go back to the questions one at a time and answer them. Okay. So the first question is, what's this pasuk doing? The answer is, it's replacing the natural descent of there's Yosef, let's go after him. It's modifying it and somewhat replacing it with a following of Yehuda. That's why it says V'es Yehuda, because as opposed to Yosef, Yehuda is going to have a specific role in contrast to him. It doesn't even say Yaakov's name again, because the point is this is a continuation of Yaakov's descent and his decision of how to go. Yaakov is not going down. Instead, he's sending Yehuda, and then he's going to follow him. The reason why he's sending to Goshen and then Yosef comes there is because the whole point is to say we're not actually joining Yosef. In fact, we're not. We're going to go to a different place, and if he wants to come there, let him come say hello to us there. We're not joining Yosef in Mitzrayim. And that's the purpose of Lehoiros. And it's like I said, Yosef hears, oh, they're in Goshen, let me go meet them. Because they're not coming to him, they're rather insistent on going to Goshen, which stands for, or it maybe is Tzion. Lehoiros is that the guide, the direction, what points how to go, has to be Yehuda and not Yosef. And I pointed out that it says Lefanov twice, and that's the point. There's a stress on Lefanov. There's a point of who goes before Yaakov, not Yosef, about whom said Vayishlachini Elikim Lefnechem and Sholach Lefneim Ish. No, the one that's going to go before Yaakov, meaning the one that Yaakov will then follow, is Yehuda. Okay. Now take a look at a pasuk in Micha, Seif Perek Beis. Okay, this is the idea, very important idea, very practical idea. Don't follow the facts. Follow the meaning. And don't follow the facts until you have meaning that can bring you somewhat adjacent to the facts. Never all the way into the facts, because that's where there's no meaning. You have to be in Goshen. Be in Goshen, don't be in Mitzrayim. Okay? Seif Perek Beis of Micha. The gathering of Yaakov. The gathering of Yaakov appears in Seif Perek Beis of Micha. Why am I bringing up the gathering of Yaakov? Because in Perek Lamed of Yeshaya, maybe then the Perek of Test, it talks about when all the children of Yaakov are together again. Because that's what's happening here. It's a major reunion. So remember that theme. And there it says also, this in the end of Micha Perek Beis, Allah ha-piretz lifnehem portzu v'ya'aviru sha'al v'yitzu v'ya'avir malkum lifnehem v'Hashem v'Rishon. The king goes before them and Hashem is at their head. And then the next parak is directed to brothers who, the Rashi Yaakov, who don't know Mishpat and abuse the poor and sell Yosef, essentially. But that pasuk says the king goes ahead of them. So they want to follow Hashem. Of course, they want to follow Hashem. We follow Hashem, but ultimately we're led by a king. Who is the king? Well, is the king Yosef or is the king Yehuda? Yosef was over dreamt about being king, and he indeed leads us into Egypt. But here, by sending Yehuda to be the king who goes Bereisha, Yaakov is saying that in order to go Lefnehem, in order for Hashem to be Bereisha, we need Yehuda to be Meirah, the pirates. Allah ha-pirates Lefnehem, parts of Avir. Of course, pirates is a word that appears in the context of Machas Beis David all the time, in Shmuel Beis. You see the word parrots all the time in the context of David. It comes from parrots, obviously. And the king is pirates, right? And the king goes Lefnehem, and that king is not Yosef, it's rather Yehuda, and that's what puts Hashem. And notice in that pasuk in Micha, it also has Lefnehem twice. Allah ha-pirates Lefnehem, like we noticed in our pasuk, it says Yehuda shalach lefanov, and that's just an interesting clue whether when there's one pasuk that's continuing the theme, or another pasuk, if it's also going to have this kind of same word twice as a way of a clue that it's corresponds to that pasuk. Okay, and if you go back to Yeshaya, Perek Lamed, there's also this point about the parrots. Perek Lamed pasuk Yud Gimel, L'chein yeh lechem ha'avrin hazeh. There the avrin is rejecting the word, the derech, the word of the Navi. It's going to be keferet noifel. It's like a parrot that falls, like a wall. Chemin is gava that falls when it has a parrot. And then it continues, okay, but I want to just point out that, like in Micha, we have this parrot, and who's going in front of us? So to Yeshaya Perek Lamed, there's a theme of the parrot, and what path should we take? The easy path, Shuva V'Nachas, or no, we have to run on a horse, and life has to be difficult. Okay, now famously, Chazal say Lahir Safan of Goishna is about Torah. And I want to show you how this comes out from the Pshat. Because Here's how it comes in from the pshat. Because Yosef said, Koi Omar bincho Yosef Redoy Lai al Ta'amoid Mehera, right? Al Ta'amoid, don't delay. And he said, Maharu Ba'alu Elavi. And he said, Umihartem. Umihartem. You have to hurry. Everything has to be done very quickly. Remember we said in the pasuk over there, Hashem saying, Beshuva Banachas. And Yosef says, you got to rush. Now, Yosef thinks he's speaking for Hashem, but really, meaning he says, Koyam Abincha Yosef, but really we need to hear the word of Hashem. And this is expressed in Tehillim Kufim Zayin. Hashalech Imrose Oretz. Tehillim Kufim Zayin, of course, is all about Yosef. That's what it says. What the solution for a hunger is not might. It's what it says, like it says, how to save from hunger. How to save from hunger depends on the davar. The davar Hashem Shemayim Nasu. Gimel. And here too, in Mizmor Kufim Zayin, Hashalech and Roserat and Nehiratz Devareh. You know what goes quickly? The word of Hashem. And the word of Hashem in Kufim Zayin is nimshal to rain, which comes from the heaven. Mitzrayim is not dependent on rain. That's why they're protected in the event of a hunger. Which is why Yosef thinks that Hashem is operating through him, through Mitzrayim, and he's going to dictate what is equivalent to the word of Hashem, Koyomar bincho Yosef. And he's going to say, rush. Says the Navi, you know what rush is? The word of Hashem rushes, not you. And the word of Hashem is like rain, which is in Tzion, not in Mitzrayim. And that's why in Yeshaya Perek Lamed, after this pasuk says, you can live in Tzion and eat lechem tzah. Then it says you're going to contaminate, defile the selim. Okay, we don't go into that now. V'nasan mitar artzecha asher tizras adama, etc., etc. Hashem's going to make it rain. When is he going to make it rain? Which takes us to which is when Klal Yisrael is united, the reunion, as I mentioned before, in Seif Perek Chav Tes Nishai, it says when all the children of Yaakov are back together, like we have in Micha, Asif, everyone's back together. Everyone's back together. That's when Hashem will make it. Where are they back together? In Tzion, not in Mitzrayim, and that's when Hashem makes it rain, and that's what really comes fast. Okay, why? How does Yaakov operate? Magid devar of Yaakov, so in other words, I started saying like this: Laharis Lefanav is about Torah, and that's true because here's why: because Yosef is offering an alternative, but that's not the Dvar Hashem Shemayim Nasu. That's the Dvar Yosef, and Yaakov says no. I take Magid devar of Yaakov, which is Chukav Mishpat of Yisrael. So the sending Yehuda instead of Yosef and saying we're not rushing like you told us to do. We're going to go b'shuva v'nachas. We're going to go to Tzion, which is like Tzion. We're not going to go down to Mitzrayim. Is saying we're taking the Magid V'Arol Yaakov Mishpat of Yisrael, which is Torah. So therefore, Lahiris Lefanav is Torah. That's the pshat in this. Yehuda going to do Torah in the Bismash. Okay. Zem Masher Tznu Levaya.